Speck just didn't fit in anywhere.
I think Richard Speck was just a different cut of person than what we were used to in our town. He was a stranger and dressed kind of flashy.
His brothers and sisters were well aware of his troubles with the law down in Texas, but Richard promised that he had outgrown his wild ways. They wanted to believe him and did what they could to help. Richard's sisters found him cheap room and board with family friends. His brother William was a carpenter and got Richard a job sanding plasterboard for another carpenter in town. Initially, Richard didn't let them down. He showed up for work on time and kept his tattoos covered. But Speck's dream of recapturing his past was quickly shattered. After only 2 weeks in Monmouth, he learned that his ex-wife Shirley had remarried. The news overwhelmed Richard, dredging up memories of betrayal and abandonment. He quit his job, moved into a cheap hotel, and lost himself in a haze of alcohol and pills. One night, Richard tagged along with a group of locals for some late-night drinking in a neighboring town. During the car ride, Richard started bragging about the woman in Dallas who he had nearly killed.
He started talking about the woman in Texas that he'd threatened with a knife, and it was different than all of us guys that I drank with, you know. We talked about different stuff than that, you know, so it was a little bit off the wall for our group of people.
When they arrived at the bar and sat down, Speck showed off an 8-inch hunting knife he called his insurance policy in case of a fight.
He was somebody to be scared of or apprehensive of, but I was scared of him. Plain and honest truth, I was scared of him.
Speck's rage was building, and his need to avenge what he considered his ex-wife's betrayal was driving him to commit an even more violent crime. On the night of April 2nd, 1966, Speck broke into the home of a 65-year-old woman in Monmouth. Speaking softly and brandishing a knife, he blindfolded the woman and politely assured her that she would not be harmed if she complied. After raping her, he sliced her housecoat into strips and used them to tie her arms and legs together. Then he disappeared. The woman told police her attacker had a soft southern drawl. In a small town on the Illinois prairie, few people fit that description, and Speck became the prime suspect. After brief questioning by police, he skipped town.
One act of criminal behavior led to another. Once he went down that road, it was apparently difficult or impossible for him to turn back.
Speck was being chased by the law for the second time in as many months. He was running out of places to hide. His last chance was Chicago, where his sister Martha lived with her husband, Gene Thornton. Richard showed up on their doorstep claiming he had left Monmouth because the local mafia was trying to force him to sell drugs for them. The couple didn't believe him, but Gene found Richard work as a merchant seaman. On April 30th, Speck sailed out of Chicago's Calumet Harbor as a deckhand aboard an ore boat bound for Michigan's Upper Peninsula. After 4 days, in the midst of a storm, a shipmate found Speck doubled over in pain. The ship's doctor quickly realized that Richard had an acute case of appendicitis.
It was definitely an emergency because he was in severe pain, and he had to be transferred to a hospital right away, and the doctor had stated that if it hadn't been within an hour, that he more than likely would have died.
Richard's appendix was removed in a Michigan hospital. He recovered there for the next 2 weeks, enjoying the attention he got from the young nurses. His brush with death did nothing to quell Speck's self-abusive nature. When he returned to the ship, he was far more interested in getting high than in working.
When he drank, I noticed one thing that he did that most of the other guys didn't do, that he used to take pills. I think he called them Redbirds. And he would have a quart of vodka in his hand, and he would swig on that and take pills.
Speck's behavior became more and more unpredictable. Once, he fell off the boat. 2 other times, he exposed himself to crew members. When he pulled a knife on a superior, it was the last straw. He was fired from the ship on June 14th. As the boat's union representative, Jim Barrell told Speck he could get him his job back, but Speck told him he didn't understand.
At the time, I don't know what he was talking about. I didn't understand. I didn't understand what, but it seemed like there was something that he was hiding.
Speck was afraid that too much fuss might uncover his prison record and the fact that he was still on the run from the law in 2 states. He left the ship with his paycheck and visited Judy Lakanimi, a nurse he met at the hospital in Michigan. The brief relationship proved to be a rare moment of grace for Speck. Judy would say later that Richard was a perfect gentleman, showering her with gifts and expensive dinners. After 2 weeks, they parted on good terms. Richard returned to his sister's house in Chicago broke. For the next 2 weeks, he did nothing but nap on the couch and read comic books. His sister finally kicked him out, insisting that he find a job on another ship. On July 12th, he did. But when Speck boarded the boat, he was told that his position had been given to a deckhand with more seniority. Speck was furious. He sulked off with his meager belongings and spent the rest of his money on liquor. He ended up in a quiet little grove next to the Union Hall called Luella Park. Next to the park was an apartment building used by South Chicago Community Hospital to house dozens of its senior nursing students. Speck had seen the pretty young women coming and going. Just 3 weeks before graduation, they were cramming for their final exams. Richard Speck finally had nowhere left to go. His life was in utter shambles, and his rage was about to explode. In the summer of 1966, Richard Speck was an unemployed ex-con addicted to drugs and alcohol. He was flat broke, alone, and a fugitive.
He couldn't get employment. He already had a wrecked marriage. He was taking pills heavily. He was drinking heavily. Here was a person whose life was going downhill in a hurry.
Speck had always believed that he was somehow destined to shock the world. He was about to realize his ambition. On the morning of July 13th, Speck waited outside the National Maritime Union Hall on Chicago's South Side, hoping for a berth on a merchant ship. There was none available. So he called his sister Martha, begging for help. Within the hour, she met him in front of the hiring hall and gave him $25. With money in his wallet, Speck had no reason to wait for work. He left for the nearby Shipyard Inn, but not before taking another long look at the apartment complex down the block, filled with young nursing students. Speck took a room at the inn and spent the day drinking and following a middle-aged woman from bar to bar. Around 6 that evening, he approached her on the street, forced her at knife point up to his room, raped her, and stole a .22 caliber pistol from her purse. Stealing the gun bolstered Speck's nerve. Just after 10 p.m., he walked to the apartment building by Luella Park, dressed in black, armed with the pistol and his switchblade. Speck pried open the back window screen and entered the apartment from the rear. He climbed the stairs, came to a bedroom door, and knocked. 23-year-old Corazon Amorao, a native of the Philippines, opened the door. Speck leveled the gun at her. He led Amorao at gunpoint through the apartment. Within minutes, Speck roused 5 other women from sleep and herded them all single file into the largest bedroom. With a wave of the .22, he sat them down and lit a cigarette.
He was very beguiling. He sat on the floor, smoked cigarettes, laughed, talked to him, kept telling me he wasn't going to hurt him. He just wanted to get their money and leave town.
Smiling and using his softest Texas drawl, Speck said that he planned to jump a ship heading for New Orleans and began collecting money from the 6 women one by one. At 11